3 adult New Zealanders and 1 in 10 children are obese. 35% of our adults are overweight. If we don't get on top of this, we can say goodbye to any sort of meaningful public health spending in 20 years because we're going to have a diabetes tsunami on our hands.
That's right. And
so we've got to get our heads sorted on this.
If you assume that a sugar tax is going to fix it by itself, it will not work.
Internationally proven.
Oh, come on. Come on.
It is.
If let me put in place a program to educate parents, and then we'll see how much those rates drop. They'd drop a hell of a lot more if you had educated parents who knew you don't give your kids Coke, who knew that when you send your kids to school, you send them with a bottle of water and it's free out of the tap.
All right, your thoughts most welcome on that. Text us 21001. Now, we've all heard the saying, finally on the show, talk is cheap. In Finland, talk is non-existent, it seems. Small talk, that is. Finns apparently don't understand the concept of idle chit-chat. But because of globalism, some Finns have decided to see what the fuss is all about and take up the small talk game, hiring tutors, taking lessons. Why break such golden silence? So now, according to the Wall Street Journal, a Finnish small talk tutor told students this quote. Here's the quote. Lower your standards. Not every conversation you have has to be clever, as we know on the panel. You can comment on food, any music that is playing, even the weather. It's hardly inspiring, isn't it? But where do you stand on the concept, or David, you first, on small talk? Are you good at engaging? Do you like engaging it, or do you like just the big issues?
I like doing it with people that I'm familiar with, but when I'm not familiar with people, I'm not a fan. So say in an elevator with strangers, there's this weird compulsion between people to maybe talk, and I'm a big extrovert and I'm not a big fan of it. And so if you're an introvert, then I can only imagine that having someone come at you with small talk is possibly a nightmare.
It's interesting because I correct me if I'm wrong, but I did hear that Muldoon was just not a fan of idle talk or small talk whatsoever. It was straight into...
I'm somewhat amazed that you had to reach back sort of 45 years to come up with that comment. I thought, oh my God, who's written this? Are they 75? And it was you, Wallace. Was it you?
What? What did I write?
About Muldoon was said to hate it. Small talk.
Yes.
Yes. Well, you were right.
Am I right?
Yes, because I worked for him.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Well, he, like many people in politics, are very good in front of an audience, perform for 5,000 people, no problem, but put them in a room with 6 people who are strangers and they find it very difficult. I tell you someone else who I think is like that, Brian Tamaki. Brian Tamaki is a great showman. You know, he can perform in front of a big audience at his church, but you have him in a room with a few people he doesn't know and he's not quite so confident.
Interesting.
And that's quite prevalent with some politicians who are very, very good at the performance. I think it's also true of people who are actors.
You in a green room, do you like to have idle chit-chat or do you like to sort of bunker down?
Yes, no, I like to have idle chit-chat because normally it's against an opponent. I'm trying to put them off.
Obviously. You have been a wonderful panel. We kind of broke the record of feedback today. We had David Cormack and Michelle Bogue this afternoon. Have a great weekend, folks.
Thank you. Thanks
Good
for having me.
On.
A pleasure.
And thank you to our...
Nice to chat, David.
David?
Always a pleasure, Michelle.
Nice to chat. We'll do some small talk sometime.
And I'm Wallace Chapman. See you next week.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, dozens of people are in quarantine this long weekend after another measles case in Northland shuts down a childcare centre. A $17 benefit bump by 2023. While plenty of time to decide what to spend it on, the Finance Minister reckons it could put meat in the groceries, but is it meaty enough to make a difference? National claims deadbeat dads are the only ones getting a tax break this year. Brace for 5 weeks of industrial action from teachers. And a band-aid or a real solution? We have the details of St John's latest offer to its ambulance staff. And how do you like your hangi? Halal, perhaps?
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. A man described by his grandfather as a dangerous white supremacist will remain behind bars after 2 appearances in Christchurch District Court today. 22-year-old Frank Finch was sentenced to 14 months in prison for crimes including theft and unlawfully getting into a motor vehicle when he appeared this morning. But the police have also laid an additional charge of threatening to kill, to which he will enter a plea next month. His grandfather, Rod Finch, was at court today and says the threatening to kill charge came as a surprise. But he was happy with the outcome of the first sentencing, given that his grandson could have been released today.
As of last Friday, there was nothing in place to support Frank upon his potential release today. So at least we've got now a proposed program which I believe will, over time, get Frank back into the community as a law-abiding contributor to society. And that's all he wants.
Rod Finch. More than 70 people are in isolation in Whangarei because of a case of measles at a city childcare centre. Northland DHB says a young child attending daycare came down with measles last Friday and the centre has been closed for a week. The Medical Officer of Health, Virginia McLaughlin, says the DHB's traced 118 people who had contact with the child while she was infectious. Those now in isolation include the daycare staff and families who use the centre.
The majority of staff weren't immunised, and because of the young age of the children involved, the majority of them aren't immunised because need to be 4 to have your second MMR vaccination.
Dr McLaughlin says contacts who could not show proof of immunity to measles have told they must stay away from work, school and public places till next Friday. Northland has one of the lowest immunisation rates in New Zealand, and this is the 5th measles case in the region since January. The government has pledged to recruit 1,600 more workers for mental health care over the next 5 years. Yesterday's budget set aside $455 million to provide frontline help for people with mild to moderate mental health and addiction needs, a service that will in time help 325,000 people. The Health Minister, David Clark, told media at the Mangere Community Health Centre in Auckland that the workers will be a mix of those already in the health industry and those who are new to it.
About a quarter of those are likely to be new. A number will be retrained. People with existing health qualifications who may be working in related fields will get specific training to be suitable in this area.
David Clark, the Health Minister, the government says it will be looking to recruit New Zealanders instead of workers from overseas. State Highway 25 heading up the east coast of the Coromandel Peninsula is still closed due to a serious crash near Pukepoto, south of Tairua. It's the only road heading up the east coast and it's not yet known when the road will reopen. Snow is expected to fall down to 400 metres over the South Island and on the peaks and higher roads in North Island today and tomorrow. A Met Service forecaster, Lisa Murray, says wind warnings are also in place for parts of the North Island, including Hawke's Bay, south of Hastings, Taurua District, southern Whanganui, Manawatu, Wairarapa and Wellington. But she says the weather conditions will improve during the weekend.
It is cold. Some areas are getting snow. We have strong winds as well. But as that moves off the country and we head to Queen's Birthday, it does fine up for much of the country. There's plenty of sunshine, just a few showers affecting those southern areas.
Lisa Murray from Met Service. A proposal for Hawke's Bay residents to pay a fee to mitigate against climate change won't cover protecting private property. A joint council committee has unanimously recommended that residents be charged an extra $30 a year to establish a coastal contributory fund. The Napier City Council, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and the Hastings District Council will now decide whether they will back the recommendation. Hastings District Council Deputy Mayor Tania Kerr says it will only fund what's in the public good.
This is about protecting public access. It's about protecting council facilities such as roads. It's about protecting community facilities such as rural bridges.
Tania Kerr says she wants to ensure future generations don't shoulder the burden of climate change costs. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. On to sport now. The West Indies skipper Jason Holder is refusing to get swept away or swept up in talk of breaking the 500-run mark as his side prepare for tonight's Cricket World Cup clash with Pakistan at Trent Bridge in Nottingham. England racked up a one-day international world record of 481 for 6 in 50 overs against Australia at the same venue a year ago. The West Indies batsmen have been in good form in the lead-up to the tournament, smashing 421 runs in their final warm-up game against New Zealand. But Holder wants his 8th-ranked team to fly under the radar and isn't making any bold predictions.
I just don't want to sit before a game and say, we're looking to score 500 or 600 for the matter of fact, and I just want to play, as we see it, assess the conditions like any other game.
New Zealand play their opening match against Sri Lanka tomorrow. The New Zealand under-20 football side is adamant it won't be overawed in the knockout phase of their World Cup in Poland. After winning their first 2 games to secure a place in the knockout stage, New Zealand were beaten 2-0 by Uruguay this morning to finish second in their group. New Zealand will play Colombia on Monday morning for a place in the quarterfinals, but striker Max Mata says they are not daunted at the prospect of playing the 3-time South American champions. He says they look forward to testing themselves against the best and have already surprised plenty of people at the tournament. The Toronto Raptors have won the opening game of the NBA basketball finals with a 118-109 win over the Golden State Warriors in Toronto. And that's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life meets a dairy farmer who's opted for quality over quantity. When it comes to milk production, no more palm kernel for his cows. Dream pop exponents Finch for rabbits are this week's live act, and Catherine Whitby introduces us to the element copper, which, because of its colour, has inspired a sonic tonic dedicated to redheads. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now here's the short forecast from Met Service taking us to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, a few showers, some heavy and possibly thundery tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty in the Central Plateau. Occasional showers, some heavy tomorrow. Squally thunderstorms are possible near the coast from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne to Waited Upper, also Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud at times. Evening rain tomorrow. Hortowhenua through to Wellington, isolated showers. Rain from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy and thundery. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, a few showers in Buller, spreading elsewhere tonight, and rain tomorrow, heavy and possibly thundery for a time. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy and possibly thundery in Westland today and everywhere for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, high cloud, rain about the Alps, occasional falls elsewhere. Otago and Southland, scattered rain clearing by evening. Another period of rain tomorrow evening though, and at the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, a few showers tomorrow, then late rain. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Dozens of people in Whangarei are in quarantine tonight after confirmation of another case of measles, bringing the total number in Northland to 5. The latest has forced a daycare centre to close its doors. The child infected with the highly contagious disease went there. The preschool, which is not being named, employs more than a dozen staff and cares for about 60 children. And up to 20 people may have also been exposed to the illness at a medical centre. Those who aren't immunised or can't prove they're immunised are being asked to go into isolation. Northland DHB's Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Virginia McLaughlin, says that it's forced many at the daycare centre to stay home.
The daycare has decided to close, mainly because they haven't any staff at the moment really available to provide care to the children.
Because of the isolation issue?
Yeah, because they're unable to provide us evidence that they've got immunity to measles, and because they've been exposed to a case that will have been infectious while they've been at that daycare, we have to be clear that they may go on to develop measles, so we can't put other people at risk.
So obviously we're coming up to a holiday weekend here and people may have had plans to, socialise, go away, etc. Are you confident that the message about staying isolated is being heard by everyone involved here?
Yeah. I would like to think that if the public health nurse team has contacted people and asked them to exclude, they will do the right thing. Because the reality is, if you've been asked to stay in isolation, it's really important that you do so, because that ensures the rest of our community are protected.
So other than the daycare centre, what other people are you tracing? Did this child have contact that spreads far and wide?
We're contact tracing for this particular case 3 main groups: the family, the daycare, and also the medical practice involved. And I guess that we really need to reinforce to people, if you have a rash and you think it might be measles, please phone ahead. Please let ED, please let the medical practice know, So you don't actually go into the waiting room area, because if you go into the waiting room area and you have the rash, you'll be infectious, and then potentially you're going to expose other people to the measles virus.
So was this child in the waiting room at a clinic?
Yes.
How long for?
Oh, I can't tell you the exact time frame.
And potentially how many contacts did they have with people while they were waiting?
There would have been more than 20 in that situation. Our general practices are very busy, as you can imagine.
Is the immunisation message getting through?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it is, to be quite honest, because we've been putting messages out for several months now about the importance of being up to date with vaccinations. And for whatever reason, I guess some people are definitely doing the right thing, and we say thank you very much to them, but some people aren't.
And why aren't they? Is it a choice mainly, or is it not having the information available to them?
I don't know. That's a question. Maybe you could ask our public and find out.
So the child that is infected, had they had any of their immunisations?
Yes, this child has had one MMR.
So was not fully immune?
No.
You said that this is the 5th case, and you are looking at whether there are any links to the others, and at this point you can't see a link. So where do you think this child became infected?
Well, that's what we will have to, continue to review. So I can't really comment on that at this point in time.
That leaves you a little bit exposed, doesn't it, if you don't know where they caught it from?
Well, I think the thing is, at the moment, we look through, it's understanding the epidemiology of the situation. We have a case, we really try and strictly contact trace around that, and the people that we identify as immune, we isolate. And then we see if there's another case. If there's another case, well then we map around that, and sometimes we can find a link, whether there's been a common exposure. And we just keep working on like that. If we do our job really, really well and we're supported by the public in the isolation, well then we may have additional cases in the people that we've already identified. And that's a really good thing, because we've already got them isolated, so they're not, walk about in the community while they're infectious.
And that is Dr. Virginia McLaughlin, who is the Northland DHB's Medical Officer of Health. Now, the daycare has to wait until June the 7th to find out if it's in the clear, and the medical centre has to wait a few days later, and on about June the 10th, they will know whether or not they are in the clear too. It is 12 minutes past 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Are you one of those people in isolation over the long weekend because of that measles case? Drop us a text. You can reach us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz about anything you hear on the program today. Deadbeat dads are the only ones getting a tax cut this year, according to the National Party. Parliament's been sitting under urgency to pass legislation needed to implement the government's first wellbeing budget. The first details of which leaked out 3 days ago after the National Party accessed them by typing a simple search on the Treasury website, sparking a police investigation. But today it was absentee fathers and more petrol price rises that dominated the political debate. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has been watching it unfold at Parliament.
While changes to the welfare system, described by the opposition as a budget win for absentee dads, have dominated the House today, it was petrol tax increases that came up first. Legislation that would take money out of Kiwi pockets, another 3.5 cents a litre from July. The irony of that wasn't lost on National's transport spokesperson Paul Goldsmith.
This has been a botched budget in many respects, and so once more we've talked about well-being. There's been lots of glossy pictures, lots of hype, but the first bill they pass is an increase in taxes for motorists.
Nationalists strongly oppose the government's decision to scrap a sanction for sole parents who do not identify the liable parent of a child. Its social development spokesperson Louise Upston says the coalition is hell-bent on giving absentee fathers a free pass.
What it means is that dads get to avoid being responsible financially for their children. And that for us is the bottom line. At the end of the day, parents need to be responsible for their kids. And the only tax cut that this government's given this year is for deadbeat dads.
But the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern absolutely denies that.
That is just absolutely wrong. It's hard to know where to start to unpick that because it's just wrong. Do you want me to try? I mean, ultimately, what we have is removed a sanction which basically meant that sole parents would have their benefit rate deducted and reduced down if they didn't name the father of their child, and there might be many reasons why that was the case. And so I don't know how they can say that represents a tax break for someone.
The social welfare reforms being debated today also include indexing benefit increases to wage increases and lifting abatement thresholds to allow beneficiaries to work more hours before reductions kick in. Louise Upston's colleague Joanne Hayes told the House the bill simply supports more people to stay on benefits. Ms Hayes says as a single mother, she named the father of her children when getting a benefit, even though she didn't want him in their lives.
Because the father of my child needed to take responsibility and needed to pay the state.
Absolutely.
Ms Hayes says this bill is not about improving well-being.
We will see a lift in the rates of those people that are going to young women, and it will be young women that will end up being on that benefit. There will be sole parents sitting out there that are actually cohabitating with the father of their children, and he will pay nothing. And I can say that confidently because I know the areas where it happens. Some of those I know them, and it's wrong, and they should be naming that dad.
But the Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says this is an important first step in overhauling a broken welfare system, and she accused National of beneficiary bashing.
You are not allowing people to live with dignity if you continue to stigmatise them, if you continue to shame people by setting them up against workers. That is not allowing them to live with dignity.
A raft of legislation still needs to be debated in Parliament, including a new tourism levy and the first stages of an amendment to the Education Bill that will scrap school donations for decile 1 to 7 schools, ensuring MPs will be stuck in Wellington until at least tomorrow. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jo Moyer.
The Finance Minister reckons the small boost to benefits announced yesterday could put meat back in the grocery shop for some, but others say it's simply not meaty enough to make a real difference. The budget revealed an increase of $17 a week to benefits by 2023 as part of welfare changes that the government says will benefit 339,000 people and families. Our Christchurch reporter Logan Church and videographer Simon Rogers have this story.
For many whānau in Christchurch, covering the cost of living can be tough. Even more so if you're on a benefit.
I'm on job seekers and I've had to do it all budget, like literally budget. So, yeah, it's pretty hard.
How much a week do you get?
Well, at the moment it was like $2.30 and then now it's like, well, it just goes up and down. Yeah.
And what does that cover?
That covers pretty much rent and power. And then food is pretty much like you've got to go like to the mission or everywhere else, or depending on what you're going to be. You probably have to turn into a vegan because even that's expensive, but you get free vegetables and stuff like that from all the churches and everywhere else. So.
That's from a young mum of 4 who we met outside a small laundromat in Eastern Christchurch. As the weather cools down, power costs rise. Food prices also continue to go up and up. The government is hoping to make that, though, a little easier for those on the benefits. From April next year, benefit increases will be tied to average wage increases. The Finance Minister says that will put an extra $10 to $17 in beneficiaries' pockets by 2023 and cost the government $320 million. This mum, though, doesn't think it will make much of a difference.
$17, I don't think that's probably going to do much, really, because the prices of food in the supermarkets are overly expensive. Unless you're going to feed them up on everything that's expired or just about to expire, or it could be all like chips and all the wrong things that you'd want to give your kids. So you're pretty much going in to buy a bag of apples is too expensive.
Hope Couch, who is 22 and also on the job seekers benefit, believes it will be a help, but doesn't think $17 extra several years down the track will go far.
I receive about $80 a week if I'm lucky.
What does that cover?
Well, I smoke cigarettes, so I buy a packet of Tailies, and I'll buy dinner for me and my father, and I'll probably have $20 left over if I'm lucky.
What could you get with $17 extra?
I'm not sure, probably a bit more, food, I guess, because I can't even buy groceries with what I have.
So what can you get for $17? We've popped down to a local supermarket to find out. 10 minutes later. So what do we have for our $17? We have a litre of milk, we have a jar of Pam's pasta sauce, we have half a kilo of mince, we have a 500 gram bag of value pasta, we have a 400 gram can of chopped tomatoes, and we have, finally, 4 onions. Now for a small family or a couple, this is plenty for a meal or two, but if you have several kids or a larger family, things really do get stretched. So the change might transform a meal or two, but the jury's out on whether the government's truly dished up its promised transformational change. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And that story, if you were just listening, Logan Church's story and Simon Rogers, it will be up on our Facebook page and our webpage if you'd like to look at it. Paramedics and ambulance staff could be in for a pay increase of just over 6% and shift allowances under a new deal being offered by St John. Now, it comes after the government last week announced a $21 million funding boost for St John. Around 1,000 paramedics who are members of the First Union had this week been considering strike action over what they say is poor pay and staff shortages. But after almost a year of negotiations, the union says it has been offered a deal worth considering. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Under the offer, First Union says St John staff will receive across-the-board pay increases of 6.5% over the next 2 years. The deal also includes shift payments of 5% to be introduced this year, jumping to 25% next July. Union spokeswoman Sarah Stone says it's a huge win for ambulance staff.
Morale has been at an all-time low. Unfortunately, droves of people have left the organisation, and that really also formed part of our claim, is that what workers were concerned, what can we do to keep people and what can we do to attract new people into the service? And shift pay and this outcome, this fantastic outcome, is one of those things.
She says the deal is just the start, with further funding announcements expected for the ambulance service next year.
We're in the middle of a workforce review, and that will form the funding bid for the funding to come in next year. And so we're hoping that we know that workforce review will reveal the real skill and worth of the workers, and that the government will react accordingly.
The pay offer comes after almost a year of negotiations between St John and their staff. Workers have been involved in 34 partial strike actions, such as graffiti on ambulances and staff not wearing uniforms. And this week they were balloted for the first time ever about a total stop work strike. Intensive care paramedic Anthony Ivan says the deal will likely be enough to avoid that strike, but only just.
I think this deal is enough that it would stop the majority of staff from having to swallow an extremely bitter pill, which would be withdrawal of labour. And so reluctantly, I think they will accept as a majority.
Mr Ivan is near the top end of the pay scale, but says the pay increase still doesn't fully reflect the work he does.
As it sits, I'm on about $80,000 a year, and this will push me up, probably to the 85 mark. Now, bearing in mind, from my point of view as an intensive care paramedic, that sounds like a lot of money. When you compare the skills that I can do with someone in hospital, so I put people into induced comas, do very advanced airway and clinical skills. In the marketplace, it's actually very cheap. They can potentially put me into a medical centre to replace a doctor in the likes of East Care Botany up in Auckland, and I can tell you that doctor will be getting a lot more than that sort of money.
And it's the staff at the lower end of the pay scale, those earning $19 an hour, that Mr Ivan says need a boost the most.
The argument in plain language is, do you want the person who you love, your family member, to be worked on by someone who's working on nearly the minimum wage? What are you expecting in terms of quality of care at that level? And it's not an unrealistic, it's a bit of a brutal argument, but it's not unrealistic to ask that question.
St John refused to be interviewed for this story, saying it was bound by confidentiality agreements in place during the negotiation process. But it did say the one-off $21 million payment the government made last week had allowed it to reduce financial deficit, meaning it could introduce an interim shift allowance in recognition of the unsocial hours its staff worked. Union members will be voting on the offer over the next few weeks. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Nita Blake-Person tēnei.
One person has died after a crash on State Highway 25 in the Coromandel. Motorists heading up the east coast of Coromandel for the long weekend are being warned to expect delays. Now, further south, wild weather could cause problems with wind warnings in place for much of the bottom half of the North Island and snow down to 400 metres in the South Island. Rua Pani is the Transport Agency's Auckland Operations Manager, and she's on the phone now. Kia ora, what can you tell us about the queues and the state of the roads heading up to the Coromandel, Rua?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, you're quite right. That unfortunately, that fatality has caused massive delays heading across to the east coast this evening. Unfortunately, the road is closed at Hikuai, and traffic are now having to travel right around the Coromandel Peninsula to get to Tairua and Whirianga, and that's adding about an hour and a half to their journey.
And can you give us any idea how far back the queues are backed up at this stage?
Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you how far back the queues are. All I can confirm, we've got very limited visibility in that area, but what I can tell you is that it's very slow moving. We're down to single lanes in that area. It's a very windy road, and it is going to be a long, slow journey for anyone who really needs to travel tonight.
So what's the advice? If you don't have to, don't go this evening?
Absolutely. If you can delay your journey until tomorrow, that would be best. Police are advising that road is likely to remain closed until 11 p.m. tonight.
Wow.
So we would advise customers to reconsider their travel plans tonight.
Yeah, because that's a bit late to be setting off on a long trip anyway. Okay, what about elsewhere? How is traffic looking in your patch?
Traffic is looking pretty awful, actually, heading out of Auckland in both directions. I think the long weekend, together with the weather at the moment, is causing massive delays heading north and south. On saying that, if you're heading north out of Auckland, the journey up to Wellsford at the moment is fairly constant and in line with a normal Friday journey. So it's about an hour and 10 to an hour and 15 to head up there, and that's consistent with most Fridays. And the alternate route north on State Highway 16 is only about a 4-minute saving. So they're fairly reasonable in terms
neck and neck.
Usual journeys. Yeah.
What about south if you're not turning off for the Coromandel? How's it looking?
South, if you're not turning off to the Coromandel, it's actually looking pretty good down to Tauranga at the moment and Waihi. When I say looking pretty good, it's busy. And as long as people can drive to the conditions and be patient, that's the key here. We just don't want to lose more lives unnecessarily.
You mentioned the weather there, so it's not looking too flash, at least for tomorrow. So is that going to add to some of the issues that we're seeing out there already?
Absolutely. People do tend to be a little more cautious when it's wet, which is great, but people also tend to become impatient. So we really want people to drive at the speed for the conditions, but actually allow more time for your journey because it is going to take longer.
Hey, really appreciate you joining us this evening. That's Ruapani, who is Transport Agency's Auckland Operations Manager. And as she was saying there has been an accident, State Highway 25, heading up the east coast of the Coromandel. And Rua was telling us that that's potentially going to be closed until 11 o'clock this evening. So if you don't have to go that way, don't go until tomorrow. Heading north out of Auckland, she was saying that the trip to Wellsford is around an hour 10, an hour 15, which is like a normal, pretty heavy traffic Auckland departure. Heading south, not bad if you're going to Waihi or Tauranga, she said, but weather conditions quite bad, so be careful. And if you don't have to travel, don't do it. A bit of feedback quickly before the headlines on measles, this measles case in Northland. Jane of Christchurch says, I'm 65 and I remember measles parties. Interesting concept, to ensure that everyone caught measles at the same time, so everyone got immunity. What happened to that idea, she says, these days? I don't know about that one, Jane. I haven't heard. Let us know. Did you go to a measles party? I'm probably not old enough for that. I'm getting the thumbs up here from Paul, the newsreader, who says he did go to a measles party.
I think for the not-so-serious measles, back when we were a kid, our parents used to send us off so we get them and get it out of the way.
Don't take that as medical advice. We'll come back. We'll come back to you on that one.
Do not believe that.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, parents prepare for more strikes, the halal hangi in Christchurch, and the Black Caps prepare for their opening match at the Cricket World Cup. As always, we would love to hear from you, so do text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But here's Paul with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. A man described by his grandfather as a dangerous white supremacist remains behind bars tonight. 22-year-old Frank Finch has been sentenced to 14 months in prison for crimes including theft and unlawfully getting into a motor vehicle. But the police have also laid an additional charge of threatening to kill, to which he will enter a plea on next month. His grandfather, Rod Finch, was at court today and says the threatening to kill charge came as a surprise. But he was happy with the outcome of the first sentencing, given his grandson could have been released today. A case of measles at a Whangarei childcare centre puts more than 70 people into isolation. Northland DHB says a young child attending daycare came down with measles last Friday, and the centre has closed until next Friday. Those now in isolation include the daycare staff and families who use the centre. Most of the staff were unvaccinated, and many of the children are also at risk because they're under 4 and too young to have had their second measles shot. People who've had any contact with the little girl and can't show proof of immunity have been told to stay away from work, school and public places until next Friday. A young family has been winched to safety after being trapped down a bank for 12 hours overnight after a car crash. The couple and a baby went off the road last night on State Highway 5 near Waipunga Falls, southwest of Taupo. No one was alerted until this morning when the man was able to climb up the bank to seek help. Fire services abseiled down to the family and a helicopter winched people to safety. The details of their injuries aren't known, but Senior Constable Dave Wells from Taupo says no one was seriously injured. The government is promising to hire 1,600 more mental health workers over the next 5 years, and it's looking to recruit New Zealanders instead of workers from overseas. The Health Minister, David Clark, says there'll be a mix of those already in the health industry and those who are new to it. The Prime Minister is rejecting National's claim that deadbeat dads are getting a tax cut thanks to the wellbeing budget. Parliament is debating under urgency legislation to enact the government's welfare changes announced in yesterday's budget. These include indexing main benefits to wage increases, lifting abatement thresholds and removing the sanction on solo parents who do not name the other liable parent of the child. National says removing the sanction absolves absentee fathers of financial responsibility. But Jacinda Ardern says that's not the case because it only removes a penalty payment. Those are the headlines. We'll have more news at 6.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's brought a lot of papers with you today, Nona.
Not that many, actually, just 4.
Must be a lot happening in the business news. OK, let's start off with another survey that shows consumer confidence as well as trailing off again.
Yeah, pretty gloomy these days. And that's also because of, there's been a lot of talk about slower economic growth. That always flows through to consumer sentiment when consumers start to believe it, and they're starting to believe it. So we've gone backwards somewhat to what we've seen, I guess, the lowest level in 6 months. So basically, consumers are gloomy about everything, their outlook, their own outlook. fewer want to buy a major appliance, although still quite a few, I guess, what is it, a net 43%. Still quite a few people are out there looking for major appliances. But, the sentiment is falling across the board. So a net near about a quarter of consumers expect to be better off financially, but that means the rest don't. So that's a lot of people who are expecting to be worse off.
So they're hunkering down, in essence, and not spending their spare cash.
Yeah, they're not. They're not, and their outlook is relatively gloomy. We've moved down a bit, and it's not just, current conditions, it's the future ones too. And generally, it's going to be hard for that to reverse, given, a lot of other indicators that are going on in the economy that are pointing to a slowdown here in New Zealand, but not just in New Zealand, globally as well.
Does the survey get an idea of what it is that is making them gloomy specifically?
It's hard to know. I mean, it could be housing. Because if a lot of people live in Auckland, house prices in Auckland are certainly sluggish. So sure, there have been some signs that things might pick up, but we haven't seen them yet. The government stimulus program for housing, not sure whether there was anything
Kiwi
in the
Build.
budget. Did you see anything there?
No, only for Housing First, the social housing policy,
okay.
Housing First.
Yeah, I didn't really study the housing part of it, but from what I read from economists and so on, they seem rather underwhelmed.
And no mention of Kiwi Build.
Right. And there's no sense that business sentiment will perk up either anytime soon. Certainly the people we've been talking to since the budget has been, the same old gloomy outlook. So yeah, can we talk ourselves into a recession or an economic downturn? Well, certainly we can. That's one sign that could potentially tip us that way. But so far, we still have economic growth. We're still doing better than most of our counterparts in the world. So yes, sentiment's gloomy, but let's just see whether or not people go out there and buy those major appliances.
Interesting. Okay, so Commerce Commission now has indicated that it's not very likely to approve this infrastructure company, Infratel, plan to buy Vodafone. Now, what's the problem with that?
Well, they're majority owner of Trustpower, which has interests in broadband, not just broadband, but energy and power and so on, because Infratel invests in utilities.
Yeah.
And broadband is a utility. Vodafone is arguably a utility because it's a mobile phone operator, right? And they are in the same space as Trustpower. So conceivably they're competitors, and therefore that would lessen competition. So the Commerce Commission has signaled that they would unlikely approve the deal if it went ahead in its current state. However, Infratel has previously indicated they'd be willing to sell their stake in Trustpower in favour of Vodafone.
They'd rather have Vodafone.
Well, I guess why not?
Interesting.
They would probably, look to sell that. So watch this space. We're looking at a decision sometime in July from the Commerce Commission on whether or not they would approve this merger, which would be with a Canadian asset management firm, joint investment. Infratel's looking to buy about 50% of Vodafone. It's a big investment. I'm sure it would be a flagship piece of their pie. Infratel owns a lot of assets, and so this would be another one.
And what's been going on the market ahead of a long weekend?
Interesting, though.
Really?
Because, yes, Donald Trump couldn't stop himself from his tweeting. No, he had to tweet that he was going to slap some tariffs on some all Mexican imports into the United States. I think that was what I read on the Twitter feed. Shocking, really, because that was not expected. And basically, the investors did not like that. No. And that really put a damper on things. And the markets reacted as you would expect, with a lot of negativity, because there's a concern that with all this trade, tough talk on trade, the United States could very well tip not just itself, but the whole world into a recession, because people are backing off. Even in China, there was some really disappointing economic indicators coming out of there, which also darkened the move further. So overall, you would expect, but did that affect us in our local market, you might ask? No, it didn't, as a matter of fact. Our local market rose 0.5%. That's the NZX Top 50 Index. 46 points up, to 10,118, which is an improvement from yesterday, which was down.
So are we not paying attention to Mr. Trump's Twitter feed, or do we feel insulated from it?
Well, maybe we don't care.
Yeah,
maybe we don't care. But if you were a Fisher and Paykel investor, you might, because they have a big factory there and they export from their Mexican firm, that factory, into the United States market, which is their biggest market. Counts for more than half of their income. So it could be a big deal for if you're a Fisher. And Fisher and Paykel is a very important company in New Zealand, may I add. So how they could diversify that, I don't know. It still was a shock to the market. They were not expecting that. Anyway.
Your dollars?
Our dollar is steady, holding steady, 65.1 US cents, 94.1 Australian, and 51.6 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Have a great long weekend if you're getting one.
I am, thank you.
Nona Peltier with our business news this Friday. Now, parents are bracing themselves to cope with 5 weeks of industrial action from secondary teachers. They're refusing to teach 1 year group of students for each day week. For 1 day each week. Does that make sense? So starting with year 9 next Tuesday, and in the middle of the month, they're holding a week of rolling 1 day regional strikes. Now, the Primary Teachers Union has yet to announce its next move, but it has already held 3 strikes, and further action is considered likely. Now, with no end in sight to the disruption, our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, took to the streets to ask parents if they've had enough yet.
Secondary teachers have held only 1 strike so far, but they're now promising 5 weeks of action, and this Wellington parent has already had enough.
I've got 2 secondary-aged children and they're in different years, and the rolling strikes as proposed are going to cause us as parents quite some difficulty, because my wife needs to take days off work unpaid to do that, and with them rolling on different days, it's actually quite a difficulty for us.
Kevin Yang also has children at secondary school. They're old enough to look after themselves on strike days, but he hopes the union and the ministry can reach a settlement.
Seems to me the government already reached the limit, so hesitate to support the teacher. I hope they can stop there or go for the negotiation rather than just go for a strike directly.
Primary school teachers and principals have held 3 strikes, and it's not clear what further action they might take. Ed Ballard has 3 children, and despite the disruption caused by the strikes, he supports the teachers and says he'd put up with more.
There's a point where it becomes unjustified, and I think that they'll begin to lose some of the support that they're likely to, have at the moment. But provided they don't take it too far, I think, I'd support them for a wee while longer, definitely.
The unions say the teacher shortage is proof a better deal is needed. The principal of Nayland College in Nelson, Daniel Wilson, says the problem has taken a while to reach his region, but now his school is in the unprecedented situation of losing 6 teachers in the middle of the year. Mr Wilson says the departing staff include one who's returning to Australia because New Zealand teachers are not paid enough, and others who are going to work in international schools. He says teachers need a better deal, and he's hopeful a settlement can be reached.
I'm definitely optimistic. I mean, they'll come to an agreement in the end. But I think that the ministry and the minister do need to start listening very carefully to some of the concerns on the ground. And I'd welcome the minister to come and visit my school any day of the week and see the fabulous job that our teachers are doing, but also the vast amounts of time and effort they have to put into doing their job at the very best of their ability.
The Secondary Principals Association held its annual conference this week, and its president, Deirdre Shea, says members are anxious about the prospect of prolonged industrial action. She says not everyone supports teachers' plans, but they all agree with their goals.
Things need to change. People need to be attracted into the profession. They need to stay in the profession, and they need to be supported to enjoy and be able to be at their best. So those 3 things are of genuine concern across the board with principals and teachers.
The Education Ministry is organising facilitated bargaining with the teacher unions through the Employment Relations Authority. But without more money from the government, the outlook for a settlement is bleak. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Get in touch on that one. How are you going to cope with those rolling strikes in essence? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Interested to know if you are still supporting the teachers as they are ramping up that industrial action. Now, we're getting a lot of feedback on the measles situation in Whangarei. Now, this is where dozens of people are in basically quarantine after a young child has been confirmed as having measles, and the child went to a daycare centre and also a medical medical centre where they've come in contact with other people. We had someone get in touch and say they thought they used to go to measles parties to spread it to get immunity. Now, Doug has got in touch and said they were chickenpox parties, not measles. Chickenpox is a much less lethal disease, says Doug's. And this person says, chickenpox parties, measles can cause very serious complications like pneumonia or, now brace for this one, let me have a crack at it, or meningoencephalitis. And someone else says mumps parties but never measles. And Annis has texted in to say, yes, I attended a measles party, a chickenpox party, but not a mumps party. And this one from a 67-year-old listener who says, we played and visited children with measles, as I recall it, so that we caught it and got it out of the way before we were of childbearing age. This also included German measles. The belief then was to get the measles out of the way, as they were twice as bad if you got them as an adult. Remember, this is not medical advice. This is people reminiscing about their childhoods. Measles is an incredibly infectious disease. If you think you have been exposed, the advice is to not to isolate yourself and not come in contact with other people, and to seek medical advice and to call ahead before you turn up at a doctor's room. It is almost 5:45. The captain of the cruise ship involved in a crash on the River Danube in Budapest has been arrested by the Hungarian police. 7 people are known to have died, but 21 are still missing. The police are questioning the captain, who is Ukrainian. The BBC's Gareth Barlow has the story.
In a split second, the disaster unfolded. In just 7 seconds, the Mermaid sank. The 40-ton boat forced into the water, no match for the 1,000-ton Viking.
The front of the Viking hit the back of the little boat, and then it turned broadside in front of the boat, and it just rolled over, and then the hull popped up on the opposite side of the ship, just a few seconds later, and then it was down. It sunk.
More than 24 hours on, the search continues for those still missing, but hopes are fading of finding anyone alive. The Danube is flowing in full force, its waters just 10 degrees Celsius, offering little chance of survival. The focus now for the authorities to find out what went so terribly wrong. The Viking's Ukrainian captain has been arrested, suspected of reckless misconduct leading to mass casualties.
What we can see on the CCTV footage is the small boat, the Mermaid, is sailing north, as is the bigger vessel, the Viking. When they reach the pillars of the Margaret Bridge, the Mermaid turns in front of the Viking for some reason, and there was a collision. The Mermaid got turned on its side, and within about 7 seconds, it sank.
In South Korea, relatives of the victims joined military search teams on a flight to Budapest. In Hungary, as rescue workers prepare to raise the sunken vessel, candles mark the place where a happy holiday became a tragedy.
And that's Gareth Barlow reporting. It is about 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback, so do get in touch. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you are out on the roads heading somewhere for the long weekend and you are not the driver, drop us a text. We would like to know what conditions are like out there. Remember, if you are heading to the Coromandel this weekend for the long weekend, you can expect pretty massive delays after a fatal crash on State Highway 25. Now, that road's going to be closed potentially up until 11 o'clock tonight. We'll keep you updated on that. But let us know what the weather and the roads are like in your area. To the United States now, and thousands of residents in Arkansas, Oklahoma and Louisiana are bracing for more flooding as forecasts of further rain drives fears that decades-old levees girding the Arkansas River may not hold. Violent weather, including torrential downpours and tornadoes, has been blamed for at least 16 deaths across the states in the nation's midsection already. Now, Yahara Jaquez reports.
An entire neighborhood drowned in floodwaters.
It's pretty devastating to see all this water in a neighborhood.
And now thousands across Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana are bracing for more Thursday as swollen rivers keep rising.
This is a flood of historic magnitude. It surpasses all Arkansas River flooding in our recorded history.
The river, according to the National Weather Service, is high as 45 feet in some places. threatening communities and forcing many to evacuate, as the record levels raise fears that aging levees may not be able to hold up.
Levees are designed to hold water temporarily, and they're going to hold water longer than they have in the past. So we are monitoring. When I say we, I'm talking about the entire team from local, county, state, and federal.
More than a week of violent weather, including downpours and deadly tornadoes, has lashed the central United States, turning highways into lakes and submerging all but the roofs of some homes. In Oklahoma, at least 6 people have died in the latest round of flooding and storms, according to the state's Department of Health. And in Louisiana, the Mississippi River was also at record flood levels. Back in Arkansas, Governor Asa Hutchinson said he sent a letter to U.S. President Donald Trump asking for a federal emergency declaration for his state.
Next Tuesday will be the first Eid al-Fitr festival for Muslims since the Christchurch terror attacks on March 15, with the month-long observance of Ramadan coming to an end. Muslims have gathered each night of Ramadan to the Linwood and Al Noor mosques, where 51 people lost their lives just 11 weeks ago to break their fast. Conan Young was invited along to Linwood Masjid to watch a special halal hangi being put down to feed worshippers and the wider community.
Tyrone Smith, who converted to Islam 12 years ago, is hard at work setting the fire that will heat up the iron bars and rocks that are an essential part of any good hangi. It's not a scene you would typically expect to stumble across in the backyard of a mosque, but as Tyrone says, Linwood isn't your typical mosque.
Yeah, we're at the back of Linwood Masjid. We call it Masjid Aroha. It's an informal name that we give it because it's the love we feel when we come here.
Say no more, it was like my brother's life.
During Ramadan, Muslims fast between sun up and sundown as a way to empathise with those less fortunate than themselves. It's a time for spiritual contemplation and charity, and Tyrone says there's clearly a very special feeling about this year's observance.
The timing, for us, God is the perfectionist of time, and everything is actually really beautiful, the timing and how Ramadan has came in after the tragedy, and it's a way how we can really unite and connect, and it's just a really spiritual moment for us here.
Tyrone was at work when the shootings happened. Coming to terms with the loss of so many friends has been hard to take.
I felt gutted, and I felt sorrow. I just felt really mummy, and it was really pody. Only because I also the connection to the masjid and to the people who have passed away, the shaheed. I knew them personally, and some of them I was with only a week before that.
Mohammed Ferdis has been helping out and getting his hands dirty peeling vegetables. It's his first ever hangi, and he says it's a great opportunity to spend time together and remember the 7 people who lost their lives at the masjid.
Some of them, when you think back, those are good people in the community that we have lost, but then again, there's always a reason why that happened, and I think in general, I think people take this in a positive way, and also we've seen a very positive energy towards our community as well, which is great.
Originally from Malaysia, Mohammed is a doctor and was working at Christchurch Public Hospital when the shootings happened. He rushed to the emergency department where dozens of the injured were being brought through the doors, many with severe injuries. He says it wasn't easy to keep his professional distance with people he knew so well.
I mean, honestly, it's been quite tough for me. Some of the victims, I know them, and then the ones who've been dead, I know some of them as well. It was quite a tough time for me. I guess it's quite fortunate for me because the hospital itself and my department has been very supportive of me. They gave me the time that I needed to recover from this incident, and they really support me all the way through, to be honest.
David Hansen converted to Islam 3 years ago.
It's more peaceful. I've been involved with many churches who get angry and do stupid things, and you always wonder why. And now with looking at the Islamic faith and meeting my wife and being introduced to it, it's so peaceful. Like, there's no hate in any of it. And if somebody puts it to them, they embrace them like a brother and it's gone.
We've really seen that since March 15, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, yeah. And the good thing is that anybody can come down the driveway and say hello.
David was at work on March 15 and his brother-in-law was in the Linwood Mosque when the terrorist came down that driveway with very different intentions. David's father-in-law was at Deans Ave.
They're still shattered. Shawan was inside and we lost a brother beside him, and Dad was at Deans Ave in the centre, and him and another brother got covered by the bookshelf that holds the Quran. So, blessed. But very shaken. Still smells the gunpowder in the air, still wakes up to the noises. It's still very rare and raw to him. And if people haven't had that experience before, it is just like you are back there, you know, and there might not be smoke in the air, but he will smell it. There might not be gunpowder in the air, but he will smell it. These things will take time to come out of the system. There's still a lot of shock, but there's a lot of help here for them too.
For Tyrone Smith, part of the inspiration behind becoming a Muslim was a desire to help and protect migrant Muslims who came from war-torn countries. He says the terror attack made him feel like a failure.
I don't wish that moment on anybody, no matter who you are, because that feeling, and if you have that connection to a tragedy like that, it's something that you'd never want.
And it's sort of beholden on all of us to somehow make this better, right? To help heal these wounds.
Yeah, you know, what's really healing in our community is connecting with everyone. Not only just Muslim community, our community, connect with everybody, because everyone's dealing with it in a different way. But just to assure that they're okay, you know, and if they need help, and if you know that there's a void that needs to be filled and you can fulfill it, then make sure you do it.
There are many voids in so many people's lives here in Christchurch. But with feasts like Eid al-Fitr next Tuesday, the community is not only remembering the lost, but opening its doors to welcome newcomers with the familiar sights and scents of a hangi.
Well, it's time to say no more.
Kei Ototahi Aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Karinyang tēnei.
And that story was edited by videographer Simon Rogers. And just a reminder, if you're listening in your car or on the radio, you can go back and watch that story. There's some beautiful pictures in it. It will be online and on our Facebook page later this evening. Months of planning and preparation is put to the test for the Black Caps tomorrow night when they play their opening match at the Cricket World Cup. New Zealand faced Sri Lanka first up in the Welsh capital Cardiff before playing 8 other matches around England in a bid to finish in the top 4 and qualify for the semi-finals. The Black Caps are the world's 3rd-ranked team in cricket's one-day format and are aiming to go one better after being beaten in the final of the last World Cup in 2015. Gary Steed took over as the team's coach last September, and he told sports reporter Clay Wilson his preparation for the tournament began immediately.
There's a whole host of things go into it, but I've done a lot of analysis on each of the grounds and what are the scores, what's each team look like, and different team profiles as well, which goes into our scouting for the teams. But being that you play everyone, you also have to be clear, I think, that once you've played them, that you drop that pretty quickly because you have to move immediately on as well. So there's not a lot of time for reflection and whether you're doing well or not. It's about moving on to the next game. The teams that can, I guess, adapt and adjust to the different conditions quickly will be the ones that will be most successful.
Going back to 2015, obviously you went around with the team then, but the team's success is well known. Have you looked back on 2015 and what do you think you can learn that will help you this time around?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys, or the guys that were within the squad, and I mean, they've got very, very fond memories, and one of the things that comes through is they had a really good time as well, and they made sure they embraced the moment and didn't get too far ahead of themselves, so they still celebrate their successes that they had. But they were a very close team, and I think Brendan McCullum really brought that group together, and I think that's been a real strength of our group in my time that I've had here, that it's a close group. The team certainly play for each other and they play for the team first, and it's critical to the ongoing success of the team. So us a proper crack, and we may not win every match, but as long as we're clear and we're trying to be threats out there, then that's the key thing that we're after.
Yeah, looking at things tactically, that 2015 team played quite an aggressive brand of cricket. Do you think you can take a similar approach with this team, or does the makeup of the squad mean that perhaps you need to take a slightly different approach?
Well, there isn't a Brigham and Cullum in the group, and there never will be again. So, I mean, it's always a little bit different. I'm a believer that form is important as well, and whilst we need to keep looking after the core of the group remaining the same, and clearly we've selected our team already, then there could be small changes within the makeup of the team, depending on form, depending on injury, depending on the ground sizes we're at, and depending on our opposition as well. So I want all 15 people to feel as though they're a genuine chance over there to be playing matches. In terms of style of play, I mean, everyone's talking about it being a high-scoring World Cup. If that's the case, what it means to me is we have to find ways that we can bowl teams out. I think the teams that can do that will be probably most successful.
And that was Black Caps coach Gary Steed speaking to Clay Wilson ahead of New Zealand's opening match at the Cricket World Cup tonight. Let's go back to traffic now before the news. Due to high water levels in the Waimakariri River and a high tide, Main North Road between the Christchurch Northern Motorway and Marshland Road is closing from 9 o'clock tonight. That road will be closed from 9 o'clock tonight. Road users are being advised to avoid using this route and consider using Belfast Road as an alternative until this issue clears. Christchurch's northern motorway remains open as normal with no issues.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. A young family has been winched to safety after being trapped down a bank for 12 hours overnight after a car crash. The couple and a baby went off the road last night on State Highway 5 near Waipunga Falls, southwest of Taupo. No one noticed it, and it was this morning before the man was able to climb up the bank to seek help. Fire services abseiled down to the family, and a helicopter winched people to safety. Senior Constable Dave Wells from Taupo says no one was seriously injured. A person has died and another is critical in a car crash that has blocked a major road on the Coromandel Peninsula. The single car crash happened about 12:30 on State Highway 25 near Pukeputo, just after the turn-off to Pauanui. Anyone heading to Tairua or further north to Hahe, Cook's Beach or Whitianga will have to take a detour on the western side of the peninsula through Coromandel Township. Ruapani is the Auckland Operations Manager for the New Zealand Transport Agency.
If you can delay your journey until tomorrow, that would be best. Police are advising that road is likely to remain closed until 11 p.m. tonight.
The road is the only one running up the east coast of the Coromandel Peninsula. More than 70 people are in isolation in Whangarei because of a case of measles at a city childcare centre. Northland DHB says a young child attending daycare came down with measles last Friday and the centre has closed for a week. Lois Williams reports.
The Medical Officer of Health, Virginia McLaughlin, says the DHB has traced 118 people who had contact with the child while she was infectious. Those now in isolation include daycare staff and families who use the centre. Dr McLaughlin says most of the staff were unvaccinated and many of the children are also at risk because they're under 4 and too young to have had their second measles shot. She says people who've had any contact with the little girl and can't show proof of immunity have been told to stay away from work, school and public places till next Friday. Northland has the lowest immunisation rates in New Zealand and the child is the 5th measles case in the region since January. This is Lois Williams.
A man described by his grandfather as a dangerous white supremacist will remain behind bars after 2 appearances at the Christchurch District Court today. 22-year-old Frank Finch was sentenced to 14 months in prison for crimes including theft and unlawfully getting into a motor vehicle when he appeared this morning. But the police have also laid an additional charge of threatening to kill, to which he will enter a plea on next month. His grandfather, Rod Finch, says he's happy with the outcome, given that his grandson could have been released today with nothing in place to support him. The Prime Minister is rejecting National's claim that deadbeat dads are getting a tax cut thanks to the wellbeing budget. Parliament is debating under urgency legislation to enact the government's welfare changes announced in yesterday's budget. These include indexing main benefits to wage increases, lifting abatement thresholds and removing the sanction on solo parents who do not name the other liable parent of the child. National says removing the sanction absolves absentee fathers of financial responsibility. But Jacinda Ardern says that's not the case.
It's hard to know where to start to unpick that because it's just wrong. What we have is removed a sanction which basically meant that sole parents would have their benefit rate deducted and reduced down. I don't know how they can say that represents a tax break for someone.
Jacinda Ardern. Secondary school principals are nervous about the prospect of prolonged industrial action by teachers. Members of the Post-Primary Teachers Association will start 5 weeks of strike action on Tuesday when they refuse to teach students in Year 9. They're trying to push the government into improving its offer in their stalled collective agreement negotiations. Deirdre Shea from the Secondary Principals Association says its members have varied opinions about the union's plans, but they all agree that teachers need a better deal.
Things need to change. People need to be attracted into the profession. They need to stay in the profession and they need to be supported to enjoy and be able to be at their best. So those three things are of genuine concern across the board with principals and teachers.
The president of the Secondary Principals Association, Deirdre Shea. Delays are expected for motorists in Christchurch this evening due to flooding at a busy on-ramp just north of the city. The on-ramp to the Northern Motorway from Marshlands Road along Main Road is closed due to high river levels in the nearby Waimakariri River, which have coincided with high tide. Drivers are being asked to use Belfast Road to get onto the motorway instead. It's nearly 4 minutes past 6. On to sport now, and Malta has pulled out of the next America's Cup regatta in Auckland in 2021. The withdrawal of the Malta Altus Challenge leaves just 5 syndicates competing to race Team New Zealand for sport's oldest trophy. Here's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
The Chief Executive of Team New Zealand, Grant Dalton, says the decision by the Maltese syndicate to withdraw is disappointing, as it had highly experienced and reputable America's Cup personnel involved. Malta was one of the 3 late challenges accepted, which required an amendment to the Cup protocol. All 3 teams were required to pay a $1 million late entry fee, which $250,000 of which was paid on April the 1st, and the remainder was due by October. There are now 5 syndicates left to compete in Auckland, 1 each from Britain, the Netherlands and Italy, and 2 from the United States. The America's Cup is considered the pinnacle of match racing, but has struggled to attract challengers in recent years due to budget blowouts. This is Stephen Hewson.
There are several permutations that could yet see the Blues clinch a Super Rugby playoff berth. It starts with needing to beat the South African side, the Bulls, in Auckland tonight, the Queensland Reds next week, and then the Hurricanes in the final round of pool play. And quite likely, they'll also need other results going their way. But despite having won only 5 games all season, just 10 points separate the 13th placed Blues, who are last in the New Zealand Conference, and the Jaguares, who top the South African Conference. The Blues can also take hope their season may be about to turn around after a hard-fought 19-11 loss last round to champions, the Crusaders. And that's the news.
Yo, boss man, where you going? That's brother. You need the A40, brother. Brother, crazy fire on that side. All over the news. Listen news.
On the podcast hour, have you heard George's podcast is a unique blend of music, poetry, reporting and fiction.
This is Grenfell Tower, 23, maybe 24 story block of flats.
And Backlisted rekindles interest in neglected or forgotten books. The podcast hour, Saturday after the midday news, here on RNZ National.
Here's the short forecast now through to midnight Tuesday from our Met Service, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. A few showers, some heavy, possibly thundery tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty in the Central Plateau. Occasional showers, some heavy tomorrow. Squally thunderstorms are possible near the coast from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne to Wairedapa, also Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud at times, evening rain tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, isolated showers, rain from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy and thundery. Marlborough, Nelson and Bulla, a few showers in Bulla, spreading elsewhere tonight. Rain tomorrow, heavy and possibly thundery for a time. Westland and Fiordland, rain, heavy and possibly thundery in Westland today and everywhere for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, high cloud, rain about the Alps and occasional falls elsewhere. Otago and Southland, scattered rain clearing by evening, another period of rain tomorrow evening. At the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing, a few showers tomorrow, then late rain. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A man described by his grandfather as a dangerous white supremacist will remain behind bars for now. 22-year-old Frank Finch appeared for sentencing over theft and driving charges in the Christchurch District Court this morning. His grandfather had voiced concerns over his grandson's possible release ahead of today's hearing. But the young man has been sent back to prison and now faces a fresh charge. Katie Todd reports.
Frank Finch appeared in the Christchurch District Court to be sentenced for charges of theft and unlawfully getting into a motor vehicle. But it wasn't this offending his grandfather was concerned about. Rod Finch raised concerns his grandson was a white supremacist who had expressed a willingness to kill someone if he wasn't sent back to prison. Having served just under 6 months on remand in prison already, it was possible he could have been released today, but he wasn't. Judge Anthony Couch jailed him for 14 months, meaning Finch will serve at least another 2 months in prison. Judge Anthony Couch said it was clear the 22-year-old had no remorse and was likely to reoffend if released.
The conclusion of the psychiatrist is that you lack motivation to make meaningful change in your life or to take any steps to avoid further offending. The psychiatrist also concludes that you would need extensive and long-term support in a highly structured environment to gain the skills to even consider pursuing a viable life outside of prison.
Finch's lawyer, Alistair Davis, had asked for a sentence of intensive supervision. Speaking after the sentencing, Mr Davis said the jail term was a missed opportunity.
I thought that the package that the community probation put together had to be commended. They did a wonderful job, and perhaps there was an opportunity missed, but that opportunity may arise again in the future. At the moment, we've got a young man with some pretty serious psychological problems and issues that's in jail. I don't believe that that's helping him at all, but he's done the crime, he's got to do the time, I suppose.
Finch's grandfather, who sat in the public gallery at this morning's hearing, was happy with the outcome.
As of last Friday, there was nothing in place to support Frank upon his potential release today. So at least we've got now a proposed program which I believe will, over time, get Frank back into the community as a law-abiding contributor to society. And that's all he wants.
While Finch was sentenced today, the police laid a new charge of threatening to kill last night. It came as a surprise to Rod Finch, who said he was pleased he spoke out about his concerns. He's hopeful his grandson can turn his life around and safely reintegrate back into society one day.
He's intelligent and he knows where his weaknesses are. But how do you support a person? There needs to be a structure where he's going to get that support.
Rod Finch wasn't alone in worrying about his grandson's propensity to reoffend. Scott Guthrie of the Transforming Justice Foundation said he also had concerns about Frank Finch reoffending on release.
But I think that we've done enough now for corrections to be fully aware and the support to be behind Frank when he comes out. And when he does get released, it won't be into the mainstream community. It'll be a slow and sure release to make sure that he is ready to go back into the community.
Mr Guthrie said it should not have taken efforts from both Rod Finch and himself for corrections to sit up and pay attention. He said Frank Finch had struggled with drug addiction and targeted funding was necessary to ensure prisoners like him got the help they needed.
And then also, once these prisoners are released, they're just dropped into the community with a cheque for $300 in their back pocket. They've got very little support. There's not enough money within corrections to support these people when they come back into the community.
It's expected Frank Finch will enter a plea to the threatening to kill charge in 3 weeks. Kia ora tahi ko Katie Todd, tēnei.
Hawke's Bay is on track to become the first region to charge ratepayers for mitigating the effects of climate change. A joint committee made up of 3 local councils has unanimously agreed that a $30 annual fee should be paid into a coastal contributory fund. Miriana Johnson reports.
For many residents in the region, the effects of sea level rise are quite literally already at their front doorstep. Carol Blumont lives on Clifton Road in Homoana, an area that is set to be inundated by the sea within the next 30 to 50 years. Her property is not affected at the moment because it is across the road from the sea, but the beachfront homes are already taking a battering.
There's a house over the road Johnny Bridgman built and he put a sea wall round it. Well, that's just actually getting eroded now, and the front porch that he's did with concrete, that's all falling in. And then there's another house a little down further that everything's washed underneath it as well.
Carol Blumont says the proposed $30 a year coastal erosion levy is reasonable, as long as it's used to build a seawall and groins. The Clifton to Tangoio Coastal Hazard Strategy Joint Committee is made up of representatives from the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Napier City Council and Hastings District Council. If the councils agree to the recommendation, the fund will generate $1.65 million a year to protect council infrastructure. Committee Chair Peter Bevan says councils are leading the charge.
No one in New Zealand has tried to create a contributory fund looking forward to the intergenerational issues that we will face as a consequence of sea level rise. So it's a big step.
The funds will be used to implement the Joint Committee's 100-year plan, which is estimated at around $300 million. Mr Bevan says that $30 is just a start, and it will likely increase.
The amount that we're proposing to collect currently is a drop in the bucket compared with what will be needed in the future, and that will come as no surprise to anybody when you consider the consequences of sea level rise of a metre or a metre and a half, which is what we're currently looking at.
The fund won't cover the cost of damage to or the moving of private properties and can only be used to cover the cost of what is deemed to be in the public good. Hastings District Council Deputy Mayor Tanya Kerr says there has been a lot of debate about what the public good should include.
If we understand and can tell the story that everybody wants to be able to access the beach at some point, that this is about protecting public access, it's about protecting council facilities such as roads, it's about protecting community facilities such as rural bridges.
Ms Kerr says the time to act is now to ensure that future generations don't have to carry all the burden of the cost. For Checkpoint, Cormediana Johnson tēnei.
It's 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Women's rights activists are protesting in the US state of Missouri in a bid to keep open the state's last reproductive clinic, which provides abortion services. The state is refusing to renew the clinic's licence, which will expire in just a few hours, as CNN's Alexandra Field explains.
Abortion rights protesters on the streets of Missouri as the state prepares to possibly lose its last remaining abortion clinic. The drama playing out today in court after Planned Parenthood filed a lawsuit against the state, claiming Missouri has placed numerous medically irrelevant restrictions on abortion that have severely limited access and reduced the number of health centers. Planned Parenthood's St. Louis clinic, the state's only abortion clinic, is asking a judge to allow it to keep performing abortions. Its license expires tomorrow.
The state has effectively weaponized the regulatory system within the state to regulate abortion out of existence.
The state says it hasn't renewed the license because of an investigation into some of the clinic's medical records.
Planned Parenthood has until Friday to comply with state law in order to receive its renewal license. No one is receiving special treatment.
This court battle comes a week after Governor Mike Parsons signed a new law banning abortions after 8 weeks without exception for rape or incest.
We have the opportunity to be one of the strongest pro-life states in the country.
Missouri following in the footsteps of several states that have recently passed some kind of abortion ban. The latest, Louisiana, which just last night passed a law stricter than Missouri's, and the state's Democratic governor plans to sign it.
Alexandra Field in Missouri. Subsidised vaping products are being touted as the key to helping Aotearoa reach its ambitious target of being smoke-free by 2025. Today is World Smoke-Free Day, and smoke-free advocates are highlighting the benefits of vaping in helping smokers to quit. Now, the government's preparing to launch a website in the coming weeks. It will promote vaping as a key tool for smokers wanting to stub out, and it will also advise on vaping etiquette. The website is just the first part of a wider campaign in support of vaping, which health advocates say is a step in the right direction, but more can be done. Nita Blake-Person reports.
When Melissa Morris takes her lunch breaks these days, she's no longer craving a cigarette.
I had not heard about vaping before, and I had no idea what it was about. And that was about 4 years ago, and I've been vaping since.
Melissa's ducked across the park from her Manukau office for a break and a vape.
If things get a little bit stressful through the day, you can just go out and have a vape without stressing about how long your tobacco is going to last. The vaping gives it a little bit more freedom.
Melissa had been smoking 4 packs a week for more than 20 years when she became involved in a program called Vape to Save.
It was just me trying to keep maintaining the cigarettes. Everything else was secondary or third. It wasn't really a priority. It was my first priority before food. It would be my last thought at night, thinking, how am I going to make this stretch? I'd be waking up, having a cigarette, and it's like, oh my gosh. So, yeah, it did play a huge role in my daily, weekly routine. It wasn't easy to manage either, whereas now vaping makes it so much less worrisome. You don't have to think about the packet, how much it impacts on my budget.
Vape to Save is a community initiative that's helped hundreds of people, predominantly Māori women, to make the switch to vaping.
It was just pretty much, oh, okay, well, you've taken all my smoking friends away. It was all 8 ladies. So it was pretty much, well, let's do this. Yeah.
Research showing the power of vaping as a tool to quit smoking has prompted a new government-led campaign around vaping. Mihi Blair is the General Manager for Tobacco Control for Māori health organisation Hapai Te Hauora and has been helping to develop the campaign.
It's going to be a website that will have some health facts about vaping. There'll be on there just etiquette about vaping and just best tools and what you need to learn about vaping. Research is showing that vaping is much less harmful than smoking. So we know that our communities are highly addicted to smoking. So one of the things is that we are saying is that vaping is another tool to utilise to get off smoking.
The campaign will target Māori and specifically Māori women, as the New Zealand smoking rate is around 13%, but 31% for Māori.
People are purchasing tobacco rather than paying rent or food, and it's not their fault. So we are seeing that it's a major burden, an addictive product that's killing 5,000 people every year. So yeah, it's going to be changes.
Well, perhaps once seen as a bunch of hot air, vaping is becoming an increasingly popular quit tool for smokers. This Auckland vape shop says smokers make up 95% of its customers who are trying to give up. Now, the Ministry of Health says in this statement there is scientific consensus that vaping is significantly less harmful than smoking and that vaping can also help smokers to quit. The Ministry considers vaping products could reduce inequities in this country and says that's why it's developing this campaign with the website and ads to run later in the year to help New Zealand achieve smoke-free 2025.
Kia ora everybody, it's Rebecca from Vape to Save.
Rebecca Rufiu-Collins is the founder of Vape to Save. She's worked with 300 people wanting to quit and has had an 80% success rate. Ms Rufiu-Collins is aware that vaping has its own health impacts. Inhaling fresh air is always best, but says compared to smoking, it's a no-brainer.
I've been working in stop smoking services in the treatment area for, over 15 years, and this is probably the first technology that I think is really going to make an impact, especially with Māori women and smoking, because this device, this new technology is actually really working, and at the end of the day, it's reducing harm significantly.
Participants in Vape to Save buy their own $60 vaping starter kit and are then given support services to stay off ciggies. Ms Rufiu-Collins wants to see vaping products made as accessible as possible for smokers wanting to quit, with subsidies available to help with product costs.
If someone was a smoker and they would apply for the subsidy, and then whatever that dollar amount was, that subsidy would sit with that person, and then they would go and find what device, what flavour would work for them to get them started.
Mel Morris says she'd had no luck quitting smoking with other products, which are subsidised.
Nicotine, NRT products such as gum, lozenges, they didn't work because it didn't have the same fulfilling habitual action, whereas you get hiccups or I didn't know that you had to, how to use the NRT products, and it was always kind of forced on me, so that, yeah, it didn't really last. Maybe a week, if that, and then you'd have boxes of these NRT products, which are like, okay, I'm not going to use them anymore.
Switching to vaping has completely changed Mel, and now she's encouraging others to give it a go.
Give it a try. Don't knock it until you've tried it. It may not be what suits you, but at least you can say you've tried it.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
The US President Donald Trump has launched a particularly fierce and personal attack without giving any evidence on the former special counsel Robert Mueller. Mr. Mueller made headlines this week with a rare public statement reiterating that his Russian inquiry did not clear the president of obstructing justice. Mr. Trump spoke today about Russian election interference and Democrat efforts to impeach him before laying into Robert Mueller. The BBC's Chris Buckler has the latest developments.
The president has been unable to hide his fury at the man who examined his every action during the 2016 election campaign and concluded that Russia had made significant efforts to interfere with the vote, something that President Trump seemed to briefly acknowledge with a tweet in which he specifically stated that he had nothing to do with Russia helping him to get elected.
No, Russia did not help me get elected. You know who got me elected? You know who got me elected? I got me elected. Russia didn't help me at all.
But the special counsel Robert Mueller has raised questions of potential crimes once again, provoking the president.
I think he is a total conflicted person. I think Mueller is a true never-Trumper. He's somebody that dislikes Donald Trump. There's no obstruction, there's no collusion, there's no nothing. It's nothing but a witch hunt. This is a witch hunt by the media and the Democrats, their partners. And it keeps going. I thought it was finished when the report was released, but it goes on.
What sparked that presidential tirade was Robert Mueller's surprise news conference, and specifically this statement.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime.
In his more than 400-page report, Mr. Mueller listed 10 occasions when Donald Trump may have tried to obstruct justice, but he said that he had come to no conclusion, partly because US Department of Justice guidelines say you can't indict a sitting president. However, the US Attorney General has now claimed that shouldn't have stopped him.
He could have reached a conclusion. The opinion says you cannot indict a president while he's in office, but he could have reached a decision as to whether it was criminal activity.
Congress has been left to follow up on Mr. Mueller's findings, and some Democrats are pushing for impeachment proceedings to begin. But the party's leadership is wary, fearing that such action could backfire politically. Either way, President Trump knows this battle isn't over, and he's shown that he isn't one to walk away from a fight.
Chris Buckler in Washington. Former Silver Ferns coach Yvonne Willering admits she underestimated the Northern Stars' determination to qualify for an inaugural ANZ Premiership Grand Final. The Stars defeated the Southern Steel 56-53 on Wednesday, booking a Grand Final spot against favourites the Central Pulse on Monday afternoon. Netball reporter Ravinda Hunia caught up with Willering to get her predictions.
So your thoughts, especially from watching from the sideline, on this finals of the ANZ Premiership? Any surprises for you, and what do you think we can expect to see on Monday?
Well, the surprise probably wasn't that semi-final. I mean, you have a look at it. Steel was in a position, I think they'd only had 3 losses during the season, so they were far more consistent than the Stars, who I think had 7 or 8 losses going into that game. But, you know, like the Stars players said, you know, it's about finals. In a way, it was a finals netball clash because loser went home. So they treated it as a one-off game, and they came out victorious, which is not easy to do in Steel country and in Invercargill. So certainly they took it to the Steel. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the final produces, because can they back that up? Can they back up that performance for one more game? And, only time's going to tell that. But again, you'd have to favour the Pulse in this game. They've been the most consistent team throughout. The last game was a bit of a hiccup for them, but also they had different combinations out on court, and they were probably already thinking about the final. The only thing that I question, I suppose, is that they have had a layoff period, of about 10 days. Yes, they may have played a few games, but obviously it was, whilst they could be competitive, it was the score didn't count. It didn't matter, who they're playing. So that's going to be an interesting factor, whether they come out with renewed vigour and really take it to the Stars, or the Stars want to show just what they are capable of. But on the whole, I think you'd have to favour the Pulse to win that one, again, because of the consistency factor. And also they've got some quality players in their team as well. And they've got what I call combination work there.
And that was former Silver Ferns coach Yvonne Willering telling netball reporter Ravinda Hunia she feels the Central Pulse will take out the ANZ Premiership final on Monday against surprise finalists, the Northern Stars. A moment for some of your feedback, just quickly. This texter says, how did National manage to spin the idea that they couldn't raise teachers' pay because of Christchurch, the earthquake, I assume, and the GFC, but didn't they give tax cuts, this person says? Why weren't the teachers striking then? On the issue of benefits, specifically this one that will see benefits linked to changes, the benefit's going to be linked to average wage rises. So this person says, good evening, Lisa. Read the $17 budget tax cut. Overbreeding is expensive for the taxpayer and detrimental to the planet. Is there a single policy previously put in place by National or currently proposed by Labour, New Zealand First or the Greens that disincentivises people from breeding more than a couple of children? That one from Alan, food for thought over the weekend. Hey, just a reminder, if you are heading out on the roads, in the South Island in Canterbury, due to high water levels in the Waimakariri River and a high tide, Main North Road between the Christchurch Northern Motorway and Marshland Road is closing from 9 o'clock tonight. So Main North Road between Christchurch Northern Motorway and Marshland Road closing from 9 o'clock tonight. And don't forget, there's been an accident on State Highway 25. If you're heading to the Coromandel, the road will not be fully opened, they don't think, until around 11 o'clock this evening. So keep a close eye on that before you head out and add to the traffic queues. Have a safe weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A young family has been winched to safety after being trapped down a bank southwest of Taupo overnight for 12 hours after a car crash. A Christchurch man whose grandfather warns is a dangerous white supremacist has now been charged with threatening to kill and remains in custody. More than 70 people are in isolation in Whangarei because of a case of measles at a city childcare centre. Paramedics and ambulance staff could be in for a pay increase of just over 6% and shift allowances under a new deal being offered by St John. And the government's inviting Kiwi Rail to apply for money from the Provincial Growth Fund to fix Northland's ageing railway lines. We'll have our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I'd have to say I think it's the well-meaning budget.
Lately is your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
The teacher shortage is a problem.